This week, we're going to look at two different aspects of Game Jam and hopefully provide you with some background materials and some links and some exercises that will help your group move along in this Game Jam process. And one of the things we're going to look at is the philosophy behind game jams. Normally, a game jam is all about a whole variety of different kinds of people coming together, some of them game developers, but some of them with little or no experience in game design or game development. But people coming together to try out new ideas, to see what they can get done in a very sort of intense, collaborative experience. And one thing that is a kind of a hallmark of a typical game jam is that exactly what this quote says, there's no pressure to make a $1 million game or a million copy game, or even necessarily to make a game that's going to appeal to a really broad general audience. Sometimes people get into the game jam experience because they have a kind of a wacky idea that they want to try, and that can be a really great inspiration for the game jam experience. But the other aspect of the game jam is that you have to work within the constraints that you're given. And for this reason, it's also like a really great design experience. And when we work in design, we work all the time within constraints, and those constraints, those limitations on our creative process are really useful. So in this case, you're not working within the constraint of a 2-day period, but you are working within the constraint of a 2-week period. And the goal really for any game jam is to finish a game in the time that you have. And it's also to finish a good game. So you don't want to be entering the process with the attitude that, well, we're going to make something that's it's pretty good for a 2-week game. You want rather to make a game that can really be implemented properly in 2 weeks. And if your game design, if what you're thinking about now is having what we would call scope creep, if it's getting so big that you're really concerned that you won't be able to implement it properly in the 2 weeks remaining, it's really important that you change the design, that you change the idea. These are some tips from the TO Jam. Really, they advise that you start with a well thought out game, but that is small enough in scope that it's doable within the time constraints that you have, and that you work within those constraints. I mean, that is one of the foundational philosophies of the game jam idea, is that you actually finish the game. So there's two things that we've talked about. One is you want to start with like a great idea, but you want to work within the constraints that you are given. And for our purposes, those constraints are really the time that you have. So where do good ideas come from? In your groups, you might have already landed on an idea, but it's certain to change and shift and evolve as you work. Cloning a popular game is not a great idea, but we all take inspiration from other games, and even more so, we take inspiration, especially in game design, from those things in our lives that interest us or intrigue us, or the things that we just find fun to do, even if they don't sort of typically conform to an idea of a game. Sometimes we take our inspiration even from the things that we don't understand. So one way to get inspiration is definitely to look at the world around you, and some of the things that have inspired other game designers, things like personal relationships and all of the different funny and odd and interesting and quirky things that happen between people. Those don't have to be personal relationships that you have with family. That can be like those odd interactions that you have with people that work in the stores in your neighborhood. All kinds of personal relationships provide really great fodder for game ideas. The whole buying and selling transaction is a great inspiration for lots of different games, as is any kind of competitive environment. What Tracy Fullerton mentions here, all of these tips are from a book called Game Design Workshop, but she brings up competition in the workplace. You might look at even competition in the home, competition at school, competition between siblings. There's lots of competition that we find in our lives, and even the smallest competition can provide really interesting game fodder. I have it right now. I'm getting a lot of competition between my two cats for my attention. They typically don't like it when I'm busy making videos, and that would make a kind of a fun game, I think. Another great one is games that you love to play as a child. It's great to think about some of those really simple games that could occupy you for such a long time that really didn't require any special equipment, that they can make really, really good inspiration for games, and even systems that you don't understand but you want to explore. I think about, for example, financial markets. I really don't understand them at all, and I think that the stock market is a great example of taking inspiration from a very complex system but making it kind of fun. Will Wright, who invented The Sims, this is a great quote. He was always fascinated by social insects. So ants were one of his first inspirations for his game. And his game that came out in 1991, Sim Ant, wasn't really a big commercial success, but again, thinking back to the game jam imperative, we're not looking for necessarily commercial success. So a lot of the work that we do in these game jam environments or in these like sort of beginning games can lead to greater things later. In the case of Will Wright, that curiosity about how the world works that led him to really examine ant colonies. And yes, it led to a game that wasn't very successful, but it also led him to then look at, for example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that was an inspiration for the artificial intelligence in The Sims. So I think looking outward to the world around you, thinking about all of the various things that intrigue you, are great inspiration for finding games or game ideas. And that brings me to this week's individual lab. I know that you're very busy working on your game jam in your group, but I think that completing this lab, it shouldn't take too long. If everyone on your group completes the lab, it will help to give you all a bit of a common language. So here is the description of the lab. What I'd like you to do is go to the link that's on the screen. It also will be posted in the lab module. And choose a game. There's 94 different games that you can choose from there. Actually, they're not all playable in the browser, but if you want to do this real quick, you can just choose from one of the 37 browser playable games at the TO Jam or TO Jam 2020, and pick one of the games and fill out the parts of a game template that I'm going to link for you in the lab module in Blackboard. This parts of a game template that you'll be working with is something that I used in a game jam that I organized about 6 years ago. And the purpose of my game jam that I organized was to bring some educators and early childhood educators and game designers together to develop educational games. So we had a lot of people in that game jam who didn't really have the language to talk about gaming. They didn't even really have a lot of experience with gaming. They were educators. So you might find, some of you might find the parts of the game template a little bit elementary. However, knowing that we have all different levels and all different knowledges in the class and in your group, I think it's a good way for us to sort of like get some sort of basic language down. So have a look at that PDF. Try to analyze and discuss the game that you choose using the parts of a game language on that template. And please do post your analysis to the week 2 individual lab discussion thread.